Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're going to be working on Unit 9. And we're going to begin with a little bit of lecture. We're not going to go really deep into it, but our grand goal here is basically to talk about uh, doing graphical user interface programming with Python. So far, you guys have learned how to code in Python using console programs, meaning you are writing programs for the command line. And the command line is kind of an antiquated interface. It is still heavily used by professionals, by the way, who are operating computer systems at a very deep level, and some of them actually prefer the command line. But most of us use graphical operating systems, whether it's on our computers or our phones or our tablets. And those interfaces, when we create programs for them, we call them graphical user interfaces, right? So the coding concepts behind Python are essentially the same when you do this. However, your output mechanisms are then graphical as opposed to the console. So in the console, we just use the print command. In a GUI program, you might output your content to a label or a text box or make stuff animate on the screen. You know, who knows what the output will be? It's really determined by you. So I do have some links in here that I hope that you read through. So for example, and I'm going to click through on these just to bring them up on screen quickly, just to show you. These are PDFs created from articles that we found in the past, and it just talks about some of the situations that we often run into as data analysts, basically, that we often have our data in spreadsheets, right? Or CSV files or JSON files or a database query or something like that. Usually what we call tabular information, right? Rows and columns of information. And being able to take stuff that's in a spreadsheet like that and then turn it into a graphical program in a programming language usually requires that we use the right libraries to create the graphical output. The first one that they're showing here is pandas, right? And the pandas libraries allows you to do a couple of interesting things. They show you how to import it here. That's the import command for it. Then they feed in an Excel file, and then they create a table from it, and then convert it to a thing. And then you can also turn that into a GUI program. The GUI library that we're going to look at today is called tkinter. That's not the only one that's available in Python, but that's considered the fundamental one, right? Like the one you learn first, right? To kind of get the concepts. And this is true for most languages, by the way. They often have not one graphical user interface library, but many, and it gives you different looks and feels and controls and ways to program it. But it's not unusual, for example, if you're coding in these sort of approaches, that you're importing multiple libraries. And then a couple little things that happen when you do your imports, if you can follow my mouse here, and I'm going to bring up my little annotation spotlight thing here. Like, for example, we could import pandas, and then tkinter is also imported. But I want you to notice this little thing that they're adding to it. And I typically call this an alias when we're coding. So in other words, they're importing this library, but instead of using this keyword every time they're using the library, they abbreviate it with the letters TK. Very, very common, by the way, in Python programming. Because, hey, man, I don't want to type 7 letters. Two letters is a lot easier, right? And so wherever you look at the code here and you see TK, that's in place of tkinter. So they're using that library in its entirety, referring to it as TK. And then from that library, they're also importing just the file dialogues. That's to allow you to interface with your file system. And then they're importing what they call the OS library, which allows you to interact with your operating system, right? Whether it's Windows or Mac or Linux. And, they have an example here, but basically the point is when we're starting to deal with the graphical components, anywhere you see that TK, that signifies tkinter, right? And then, there's different types of controls. So this is pointing to a frame, that's pointing to a button, and then they might put the button on a grid, et cetera, et cetera. You'll notice that a lot of times when they're working with these controls, they're also taking a complicated statement and they're storing it in a simple variable name. The reason they do that is to abbreviate their syntax. It's like, hey, I made this button. This is all the settings for the button. Now let's just put it in a thing called button and we forget about all those settings and then we just work with it. And yeah, there's little nuances to all of the little graphical tools that you use. And that's not the point of today's session, because remember, I'm going to give you the code. But if you were a GUI programmer, you would get to know this stuff very intimately, right? Typically, when you see programming teams working on software that has a graphical user interface, it's not unusual that you have one person that's really good with the interface, a different person that's really good with the math, different person that's really good with the data. You know, it kind of break it down like that. And sometimes you do get people that are good at all of it, but usually people have their specialties, right? So the concepts that go with it. And what this program does that they're showing here is they put a button on a screen that reads in a CSV file and converts it to a table, and then it outputs it and makes it look pretty. Right? That's basically the point of that little thing. But it kind of introduces you to the library. All right. So the next little posting that we have here, once again, another article. This one also focuses on tkinter, and they go through the process, like, you know, telling you how to install it and stuff. So don't worry about that. If you're using the Anaconda distribution, tkinter is already built in. It's already on your things. So if you're using Spider or Jupyter Notebook, you're a-okay. If for any reason, you know, you're using tkinter, once again, you import it, and then notice their approach here, right? They're not aliasing it, but now anytime they're referring to tkinter, they're putting in a thing called window. And so that's their alias here. So anytime they're doing tkinter, they're really using the word window, and it pulls in all the tkinter stuff. This is one of those crazy things. So like other languages don't do it this way, but that's how we do it with this tool. So they have some like simple examples here. Like they talk about like the geometry, the size and the shape of a window, what some of the key components are. So there's things that are labels where you just put text on the screen. There's buttons that we click, right? So this is a label, that's a button in a GUI program. And then sometimes we have what we call text boxes, and I think those hopefully, okay, so some of the graphics are blocked here. I don't know if that's why we're not seeing them. But I would call those some of the more essential features: a label, a text box, and a button. And the other control that we often use is called a drop down, where there's a little box and it drops down a list of things that you can pick from. And those are the ones that we're going to play with today, by the way. From here, I linked this up to LinkedIn Learning, and I want you to, if you get a chance, if you want to really dig deep into this, there's a whole course here that talks about how to do some pretty advanced Python programming stuff. It's not really required for this class, but I just want to show you that the resources are there. So let's say you're applying for a job and they're like, hey, Python GUI skills are helpful. You could brush up and learn them right here, right? And what a lot of us do is, you know, you can't remember all this stuff. These types of videos are very helpful for, you know, kind of like surgical knowledge. Like I need, you know, for example, I need to know how to do a chart with Python, or I need to connect to a MySQL database with Python, and it'll show you the code and demonstrate it with examples. So that's why that is helpful. And I'm not sure where this is taking me next. So I have, once again, the videos here. We'll augment those, but I'm going to go back to the main course page here. In that LinkedIn video, these are some of the ones that I suggest watching. I think most of the examples focus around tkinter, and they do talk about, I just saw it here, matplot library, which we're going to be looking at more next week as we move into the library unit. All right, so a couple things that's gonna happen here tonight, just so you know, we're gonna go into these tutorials now. I do have this link that I've provided here to what I call a code share page. And um, there's probably gonna be situations here tonight where I want to share code with you, and normally I would just drop it in the chat in our Zoom session, but sometimes it's too much code or stuff gets messed up in transit. So I might prefer to use this. If you click this link, it takes you to this page here, and I'll get rid of this little toolbar here. And basically the way that this works is this is kind of like when you use Google Docs and you get like more than one person that's typing on the document at the same time. And I don't know if how many of you have ever done that, but that's really kind of fun. This does the same thing with code. So if you guys follow that link and go to this page, you can come in here and you can click on the document and just start typing. It's a text editor, just like any coding engine. However, it will color code for Python. So for example, if I do a print statement and say, hello, whatever, right? It's in Python color coding, right? So when I'm going to share code with you, most likely I'm going to drop it in here. Then you guys can jump into the interface, highlight it, right click copy, unhighlight, and paste it into your own engine. Right. This is just to accelerate the workflow here tonight. Because if I was going to wait for you guys to type everything up, especially those that haven't done Python for a while, we might be sitting here for a bit. And my goal is really to show you the higher level concepts more than the nitty gritty. Right. So that's why I'm doing a completely guided approach. Now, meanwhile, back in the exercises themselves, I gave a little bit of a breakdown as to how you need to do this. And if you click into the exercise, there's some files attached here. And I do want to show you that we have two different exercises to do. And this is the starter code for each exercise. So you would download that, open it up in your IDE, and then we will add code to it. The first thing here is a zip file. I'm going to just go ahead and download that and show you what's in it. It basically has the same kind of overview approach. It has the one data file that we're going to use. So we're going to process some data, and it has a set of instructions. These files here, and I'll show you them in just a second. I think I have the instructor versions open, so I'm going to open the student versions here. They are opening up on my other screen, but I just kind of want to show you this. Yeah, and they're opening up inside of Visual Studio Code. I'm not going to code inside of Visual Studio Code tonight. That's not my plan. In fact, I might, just debating, I might use Jupyter Notebook tonight. I'm not super comfortable with it, but I might do it anyhow. But I just want to show you the breakdown of the file formats here that I've attached to the exercise. These files are files that are in what we call a markdown format. So that's why they have a .md extension. That's the same extension that they use on the GitHub platform where coding repositories sit. And what it is it's kind of like a weird way to provide information to coders without actually creating an actual document. And usually there's like in document links so you can bounce around, like kind of like a web page sort of. The instructions here are just kind of telling you a little bit of a background as how we're going to work. So we are going to do a brief little introduction to tkinter, which we'll see here in just a second. And then we'll do exercise 1 and exercise 2. And then it's got an additional list of resources, like good websites to go to or books to buy if you want to really dig in. And it also has some troubleshooting tips at the bottom, which I think is very helpful. So let's just kind of go through this file very quickly. Then I'll jump into the other markdown files, the ones that are in student mode, and we'll look at the content and then start building the exercises. And all you guys have to do is follow along with me. And right now we're starting with information. So first thing is talking about tkinter. And tkinter, once again, is the kind of the default GUI libraries for working in Python to create GUI programs. GUI, once again, and that's how everybody in the industry says it, GUI, right? GUI stands for graphical user interfaces. That includes the Mac OS, that includes Windows, since, whenever, for the last 30 years or so. And also for Linux. And Linux also has graphical user interfaces that are, and there's many of those, by the way, but there's some standard ones and whatever. But this would allow you to code GUI programs for any of those operating systems, right? Python is a portable language, meaning if you have the Python libraries installed on that operating system, you can code a GUI program inside of a GUI operating system for that environment. We usually start with tkinter because it is such a standard one, right? And as I mentioned before, it's not the only GUI library that's out there, and that's true for most programming languages, by the way. In fact, many programming languages have multiple different GUI libraries depending on what the application is. This one will work well for just about anything, though. tkinter, as it indicates here on line 20, it typically is pre-installed. So when you download the Python libraries, and if you follow like the Anaconda distribution, that does definitely have tkinter in it. If you are instead coding inside of an oddball tool, and I'll use Visual Studio Code as an oddball tool, honestly, because the libraries aren't automatic, right? I can set this up to connect to my Python libraries, but it might not read tkinter automatically. So I find it a little more frustrating. Most of the higher end Python tools, though, the ones that are designed to do Python, if tkinter's in your Python libraries, which it is, it should read it. If it's not, then there are methods for installing it. Okay, so if anybody gets into that situation, what I'm going to say right now is I don't want to demonstrate the install right now, but I can talk with you like during a break or in between classes, and then I can show you how to do it. If you're using the Anaconda distribution, which is the one we use for the Python class, the Anaconda Navigator, which is like the thing that orchestrates all the Python stuff with Anaconda, has a library tool where you can find tkinter on a list, click a checkbox, and hit install, and it does it like that. Where most of the instructions that you will see will have you go to a command line and type pip or pip, which is the Python something installer. And then you have to type a cryptic command, press enter, and hope it works. Right? And it's actually not really that hard, and there's plenty of tutorials about it. So I think maybe the first thing that we do, and I'm thinking really hard and heavy here, I think I'm just going to stick with coding in Spider. I think most of us are most comfortable with that. If you want to code inside of Jupyter Notebook, please do. All this stuff will work inside of there. But I'm going to use Spider because I think generally everybody's comfortable with it. Is there anybody here who's never used it before? I don't think there's anybody here that hasn't. Okay, good. I'm happy to see that, right? Because every once in a while I do get people that bring it in as a prereq and didn't do it the way that we did it. So let's go ahead and launch Spider just to get that up and running. And we'll give it a moment to launch it. It is a fairly large and powerful tool, so it takes a little bit to load. And if you have anything that's open inside of here, you can go ahead and close it. All right, now, like I normally do inside of Spider, I usually end up zooming in both the coding panel and the console. I do that more for my own sake, by the way. And I usually arrange my windows like this and kind of work from there. But the first little directive that we have in the instructions is to see if we have tkinter available to us. So what they're recommending is that we just add this line. So you can open up this file, and if you guys don't have it open, here it is in the chat, by the way, right? I'm going to be doing that a lot tonight. And we're just going to drop that into the engine. All right. And right away, I see I got a little yellow thing, and I'm like, uh-oh. Okay, so yellow's not necessarily bad, by the way. Red is bad, right? Yellow is a warning, and whenever you see a warning, let's take a look. Okay, so all it's saying is like it's imported, but you're not using it. Okay, so that's actually a good sign. That means it's there to use, right? Um, and the moment we type some code that includes the TK command, because this is set up as an alias here, um, we will see that yellow mark go away. Okay, so if you're getting a red marker, that means that your libraries are missing. And where you would go to fix that is you would bring up your Anaconda Navigator in the start menu. And I'm just going to show this really quick because this is actually very handy if you ever get into this mode and you're like, it says I need this library and I don't know where to get it. So if you're using the Anaconda distro, this will handle it for all the software that's attached to it, by the way. So I'm letting that load up, and it's, of course, not coming up on the screen right in front of me. I'm going to ask it to remind me later, but I want you to see, like right here on the side, that there's this environments tab. And in the environments tab, this is a listing of all the libraries that are pre-installed. And I'm scrolling. You see how there's a lot of them? Yeah. And these are basically considered kind of standard or somewhat standard or tailored towards data analysis and data science. And yes, there's other libraries that you can add to this, but we're looking for a very particular one, which is tkinter, right? And as I kind of scroll past here, I don't even see it listed. Now, the reason I don't see it listed is because it is considered a standard part of Python, right? These are additional libraries that we would consider not standard parts of Python. I know that if you took the first Python class with me and you did some of the extra credit work, this is one right here. And you can tell which ones I added in because they have this like different icon. But if you did like the extra credit work in the Python class, they asked you to use the Easy Graphics library. That's a different GUI programming library. And that was a process that you either installed through here or you installed it from the command line. It's one or the other is the situation. I just want to show you the situation here. If I was to look for packages, there's a whole tool here, and they have like different filters that you can use, and there's channels, and there are a ton of things out there, by the way, including stuff for building AI. So a lot of the big AI companies, what they're doing is they're using pre-built AI libraries to build their stuff. And those same libraries are available to you. You just have to have the wherewithal, to go after it. All right, so we have the import statement in, and for right now, it looks like it's going to be okay. All right, so the next thing that they're trying to do here is they're trying to show us what they call the basic structure of a tkinter application. Now, if you guys remember when we were doing learning about functions in a Python program and how one way to run a Python program is to put all your stuff into a function called main, and then way at the bottom, you call main to run. You guys recall that at all? Maybe sort of, yeah, a little bit. You don't have to do that, but that's really considered a good way to run a Python program. What's different about this is normally when I would do it, I wouldn't add the if statement, but what this is really doing is it's checking to see if I have a function called main, right? So if it's there, go ahead and run it. So what happens if it's not there? Well, it doesn't run. That's what happens, right? But the fact that they're putting it in an if statement keeps an error from happening. It's really kind of the same approach that we used, right? So as long as we have a function called main, it will run. That's what that code does. Inside of here, and what I'm going to ask you guys to do is copy this code. In fact, I'm going to put all of it in my code share. So I'm going to take this over to the code share right now in its entirety, and I'm going to paste it in there. So that's in my browser, if I can find the browser right there. And for those watching the video, you can like backwards engineer the URL, I guess. And I see somebody's already highlighting it. And by the way, when you highlight and copy it, which is fine, please do, make sure that you click off the code to unhighlight it when you're done, because it gets difficult for people to see otherwise. And more than one person at a time can highlight, right? So once you have all that code copied, then go back over to whatever IDE you're using. And I don't want to do the import statement twice here, so we'll just do it once. And then you notice the error message on tkinter went away. All right. So what's nice about the sample code that I have here today is it's very nicely commented and it explains what you're doing as you're doing it. So first, we're taking tkinter, we're abbreviating it as TK. So whenever we want to say tkinter, we're just going to say TK. And then that is what we're doing here. When we do the capital T, this is the constructor. So you guys remember classes and stuff. So you have like what we call a constructor function that builds us a window. So the first command we call, the constructor, and then we're giving it a name. So this is why this is kind of cool the way we do this in Python. So this is aliased already. Then we take its constructor with its tkinter abbreviation, put it in a variable called root so that I don't have to say, so the alternate approach, by the way, would be like tkinter TK. I would have to type that every time anywhere the word root appears. You see how cumbersome that is? Right? That's why we don't do it that way. You abbreviate and then you even take the abbreviations and put them in a variable, and now all of that's abbreviated in that word. Very weird, right? So if you know traditional programming, that's like, really? You can do that? It's like, yeah, you can do that in Python. And that's how you do it in Python. So this creates the window. And then in the next one, well, guess what the title does? It puts the name at the top of the window for the program. So you can change this. So for example, I'm going to be silly and say this is way cool, right? And the next statement, the geometry statement, and you should recognize these, by the way, as methods, right, that are built into the tkinter library. The geometry declares the size of the window in the order of width and height in pixels. So I'm saying 400 by 300 is the size of the window. My screen right now is 1920 by 1080. So it's going to not fill the screen. It's going to be pretty small, right? Then whatever other stuff you're going to do, you would put it here. And then at the bottom of the main method, we run the root main loop. And what this means and why is it a loop? So this is kind of interesting. When you do a console program, you get it running, it does what it does, and then it stops. Right? I mean, that's how a console program works. Unless you write a loop and put the whole program inside of a loop, and then when it's done running, you can ask the user, do you want to run this program again? Yes, no, or whatever, right? And the user can then control it, but you have to manually create the loop. In graphical programs, and this is very interesting, that's not how we operate graphical programs. They don't operate in the same sequence, but they still do work in a loop. So when they say start the main event loop, that means we pull the window up on the screen, and as long as that window is up on the screen, there's a loop that runs to see where you're moving your mouse, what thing you clicked on, what you typed on, what drag and drop you did, what right click you did, whatever maneuvers you make graphically inside that thing. And it will keep running until you hit the button that says close, or the big X in the corner that closes it. So a graphical program doesn't need a loop in code to keep it running. We just do root main loop and it just runs. And if you think about your operating system, right? When you turn on your operating system, it's always watching your mouse. There's a program in a loop that never stops. And that's kind of what this is. Right. So once you have this code in, you can hit the play button. It will run. And this is what I created. Right. And notice it came up as an icon down here and it wasn't in the front. I had to click on it to bring it forward. but we just created a window. I was able to control the text at the top. That's about all I did, and the size. The rest of it, the minimize, maximize, and the X button, that's just part of the window. That's part of the operating system. It's created automatically. There's also this little icon here that gives you the same controls. And so now this works like any program inside of Windows that's inside of a window. All the Python code that would execute would happen inside there. The difference is this is not a console. So if I do a print command, it won't just print in here. I have to create the object to print into. That's the difference, right? So, and there's no console that I can drop in. I have to create a text box or a label or something else, right? But if you can get this to work, then we're on our way. You guys all good? Okay, excellent. Now I'm going to switch over from, and I think I'm done with the markdown file or most of it. All right, so okay, now we're going to go into the exercises here. And what this does here in this README file is it explains what we're going to do in each one of the exercises. So we're going to try to get through the first exercise here and then dig into the second one. But basically, we're going to create a text box so people can type into it and a button. And we'll be able to, like it says here, we're going to build a temperature converter that transforms Celsius to Fahrenheit. Very classic programming problem. And there is a separate file, right? And this is linked up here, but I changed the names of the file so that this would point to the starter file that I provided for you, right? And I'm going to bring that up here. I think I have the tab open. Let's see. Oops. Trying to hit the little thing here, right there. All right. That's the instructor version. All right. I'm fumbling gloriously with this. Oh, there we go. So this is the student version that you guys are looking at. I do have my instructor version, and this kind of reiterates the tasks, but it kind of gives you a breakdown of what we're about to do. And how we're going to proceed with it and what the tasks are. So you do have your starter code. So the starter code is inside of here as well. So if you want to copy the starter code from here, that's absolutely fine. I think that's what I'm going to do. But if you want, you could just take the starter file, open it up inside a Spider, and then just type into it. So if that's your approach, then you would go to, oh gosh, here. Right? Grab the starter code. It should download when you click on it, and then you can drag that into your IDE. Notice how I'm just dragging and dropping it, and there it is. So if you want to do that. All right. Now, this is the starter version, so I'm going to go ahead and do a save as on this, and I'm going to put this where I normally put my stuff for this course. And you guys should have your own file management approach, obviously. You guys hear me talk about that all the time. And this is for Unit 9, so it's going to go here. So I'm going to save it as starter, and I want you to watch my strategy here. And then I'm going to do another save as and save it as complete or finished or something like that. Or in progress might be a better name at this point. But the point is, I have the starter version, so I could always redo it. Let's see. All right. And then what they've done here is they've kind of given us the starting point. So they imported tkinter as TK. Then from the tkinter library, they're pulling in what we call a message box, and that's kind of like a pop-up. They built the main function, built a window for us with a name at the top and a size, and they're running the main loop, and they're getting the main function to run. That's all set to go. Now all we have to do is populate each one of these to do things, and I'm going to do that by guiding you through it. I'm going to take my my cheat sheets, which are over here now, and kind of like step you through the process basically. And I am trying to arrange my windows here, so just please bear with me. Uh, make sure I'm in the right program here before I go zooming out and stuff. Just trying to zoom out on. All right. So the first thing that they're asking us to do is to create um, a label and an entry field for Celsius inputs. In other words, that's where like the user is going to type in their stuff. All right. So one thing that I noticed in their code here, and I'm not sure why they did this, probably to make it look better, by the way, is they added this line right below here. So I'll start adding this stuff to the code share, by the way. And I'll tell you what, I'll just drop all of this into the code share. I am deleting what's already there. So I'm going to highlight it all and paste in the new stuff. So this is the new stuff with the addition of this line. Now, anybody who's done web, right? And I know there's at least one of you here that's been in my web class and learned how to do web coding. You'll recognize the pad command as a way to add interior space inside the window. X refers to the across direction, Y refers to up and down. So we're pushing the content down 20 pixels from the top of the inside of the window and pushing it over 20 pixels from the left side of the window. That's so that when we put stuff up on the screen, it's not touching the very edge of the window. It's in a little bit. Visually, that's more comfortable. That's why we do that. All right. So in terms of the process of doing this, I'm going to kind of just follow the code that I have available here. And we're going to create first, and I'm going to do this like one copy paste at a time. So by the way, I'm going to try to keep the code share updated as I go. And then you guys can kind of refer to it as we move along. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a frame. And what they're saying is for better organization. So, and I'm just going to drop the code in here and back over in the code share. We'll get more adept at this as I go. So just bear with me here. So now you want to add that code. Now, without getting too deep into like what a frame is kind of like taking a window and splitting it into portions, right? So it could be one big portion, or I could have like split it into 4 or 8, or have like one big panel here and a couple small panels. And what they're doing here is they're putting it at one frame inside the main part of the window is what they're doing. Okay. So I'm switching back over to Spider here to do the next thing. The next thing that we're going to add is we're going to create the piece that they talked about, which is under the to do. All right, so I'm going to place this next code under there. So this is just a visual effect, basically, to make it look nicer. I would say not really required. But to create a label and an entry field for Celsius input, here's the code for that. Once again, this will go in the code share. I'll drop it in the same spot where I just did. And notice that we're going to take that frame that we created, the main frame, and we're putting it inside of a separate frame. So this is a kind of what we call layering. So like sometimes, the best way to control a GUI program is to put objects inside of each other. This is the same thing we do on web pages, by the way. And the layers of encapsulation give us basically more granular level of control over the visual elements. That's a very typical technique. You'll notice on line 18 on my screen that There's also what we call the pack method, which is applying a technique to uh, show the field so it looks a little bit different than the background that it's sitting on top of. You'll see that in just a moment. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a label. So the label um, in GUI programming is a spot where we can just put text on the screen. It's not inside of a box. It's not, something you can type and change. It's just words on the screen. So that's a label. And in this case, notice that the label says enter temperature in Celsius. And I'm also picking the font and the font size. And if you wanted, and you know all of your system fonts, you could declare a different font if you wish. Now that's kind of going past that white line there. So that means it's scrolling over. And I'm going to go into the preferences here for Spider, and somewhere here, oh, it's been a while since I've done this, so you guys might even have to help me. I think under editor, oh, and I have wrapped lines and apply, and I don't think it was working, and apparently it wasn't working, but whatever. Oh, it is wrapping. Okay, never mind. Already turned on, but if yours is going off the screen and it's not wrapping, that's how you bring it back over. They do also have an anchor. What the anchor does is it positions that label on the screen in a very certain spot. So they notice like we have a pad Y command again, and I don't know what the exact parameters are on this, but you know what? I think I can hover. Okay, well, it doesn't tell us here, but I'm going to speculate that it's putting it 5 pixels over from where it would normally sit so that it looks nice once again. Did I put this in the code share yet? I don't think so. So that's going to go over to the code share if you don't have it already. I know some of you are trying to type it in. It would help me a lot if you guys deselect, by the way. Thank you. No, we already have that in there. Okay. Or no, we don't. Okay. There we go. I'm going to give you the next thing that I'm going to enter also right away in the code share so you guys can just grab it. So this will be the next piece that we're adding. This next piece is setting up, notice what we call an entry field. And this will be basically a text box that's going to allow us to drop stuff in. Notice that we're setting a width for it, right? We're also setting a font for it. So it's using the same font as the label is using. And then we're also packing it, meaning we're giving it a background so it looks a little different. And then there's this weird command called focus. And this is an important one to talk about in GUI programming because whenever we use any sort of an application that's on screen, the item that we're currently manipulating, whether it's a text box or a button or a slider or a drop down or a checkbox or any control on the screen, when we're actively using it or like clicking on it or tabbing to it, we call that focus, meaning that currently has the attention of the program running. So when the user runs the main method or they run the program, that text entry field will have focus, meaning the cursor will be inside the box flashing, ready for the person to type. That's what focus does. Right? So I feel that's an important thing to know. Right. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to create a convert button. So I'm going to put that here and I'll drop it in here and then I'll put it in the code share for you guys. Here's the code. And then over to the code share. I'm dropping it in there too. I'm going to go back over to Spider here for a second and let's take a look at this code because this contains some things that we haven't seen before and really haven't talked about, by the way. So aside from like all this weird GUI syntax, right? And we're not like doing a super great job of, of explaining it yet, but we are working with, in this case, a button, and you notice the button method. And then inside the parentheses, we're setting all the button parameters. And there's a couple of weird things that are happening here. By the way, we're throwing in a bunch of parameters. There's text that will go onto the button. And then we have this thing, which is what we call a lambda thing, which is basically, this is how I think of a lambda, right? A lambda function, or basically a lambda is usually attached to a user interface element that executes a function when that object does its default activity. So for example, the default activity for a button is to click it, right? The default activity for a slider is for it to slide. See what I mean? And if you had a drop down box, the default activity would be selecting something in the drop down box. And what that does is when you perform that activity, it triggers the function that it's calling. So this, in this case, it's calling for a function that we don't have yet, which I think is what this error is about, right? And there you go. So for right now, we have to live with the error until we create the function. But the point is, the moment the person clicks the button, it will try to run that function. And you can guess, what do you think convert temperature does? It takes whatever the person typed into the box, does the math to do the conversion, and then probably returns a value, right? When you notice here that we're declaring a background color, this is in the form of a hex code. This is a foreground color, which is white, and they're declaring the font. And then they're also doing a little bit more styling here, and they're padding it in the Y direction, meaning from the top to the bottom by 15 pixels. You're pushing it down 15 pixels to make it look better. And as I said, right now we are allowing the error to exist. Normally, I'm not very comfortable with doing that, but we don't have much of a choice at this point. Not until we write the code for it. All right. Next, we need to have a spot on the screen where we can display the results. So like they're going to type in, I don't know, 72 degrees. They're going to hit the button and they're going to want to see it converted to Fahrenheit, Celsius, or whatever the conversion is. And so we need to create a text area to do that. So now we're going to fill in this section here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all 5 lines of code here right away. I'll put it in the code share first. And please remember to deselect if you get a chance. And over here in Spider, I will paste. All right. So we're going to take whatever the answer is, basically, and we're going to put it into another label. So remember, label is just text that goes on the screen. There will be a prefix to it. So it'll say result, colon. There'll be a Arial 12-point font. And then that's just to kind of like set up the output. So in other words, we're going to put a label next to the box that's going to hold the answer. So this is the label that describes the output. Then we create what we call a text box. And the text box is one that actually has a little frame around it that you can see. And in this case, we are declaring a height and a width. These heights and widths are in pixels on the screen typically. And then the font size, which I think, I don't know if this is pixels. This might be points actually. We use some of the other graphical settings, the ones they're recommending. And, normally I would tinker with these, right? But we're just going to take them as being good. And then we're also setting it to be disabled, which means that once the answer displays on the screen, I can't click into the box, change the answer, and type a new value, right? That would make sense, right? If you're doing a conversion, why would you want to change the answer? I would call that optional, but you could change that. Now we get to the point where we are going to set up the function. And with the function, I'm going to give you the whole function at once. So I'm just giving you that um, a heads up on that because and it's more than a few lines of code. And then we'll talk through what the code does. And then we got a couple lines to add and we're ready to roll. Okay. So let me grab the whole function first. So I have it here on my other screen, so I apologize. Just got to get myself in copy paste mode here. So first I'm going to drop it in here on Spider. Then I will put it over here in the code share. And I want to be really careful with the indenting on this because I noticed on my screen it did the same thing here. That needs to be there. Okay. So now you can copy it. And back over in Spider, I need to make the same tweak. That's got to come out one indent level, right? So you saw the little red mark there. Okay, so this function's called convert temperature. They are adding the function inside the main program body. I wouldn't necessarily do it that way, but that's fine. And then you'll notice that they are using a try except setup. Now, if you guys don't remember this from our coding class, a try except is put in whenever you have the possibility that somebody, usually the user, can do something to the program that makes it break. Like, so for example, we're going to have a box up on the screen and we expect them to type a number in and they start typing words. Okay. Yeah, that wouldn't work too well. So that's why we put it in a try block. So in other words, we're going to try all this code and hopefully it works. And that's the action, right? Otherwise, we have an exception handler here and we're looking at a value error, meaning that, okay, we're expecting a number and you're typing a word, or, you put the number in a weird form or you typed in true or false or something weird like that. And then this part of it basically will react to that error and notice, right? So the error is going to be like input error, please enter a valid number for temperature, right? And then what it'll do is it will delete the entry and then return the focus to the entry box to have the user try again. That's what the error part of it does. The main program part of it, and I'm just going to pull that over there, right? So first, up on line 47, 48 there, we are going to, and this is where GUI programming, mind you, is different than console programming. In a console program, we would write an input statement that prompts the user to enter a value. Here, the box is already on the screen. They typed into it. This is triggering after they hit the button. So the assumption is they've typed a number in, right? And so what this does is it goes to the entry field where they typed it in, it gets the value, and it runs the strip command. You guys remember that one? A little bit, right? What the strip command, what it does is if a person typed in a space before or after the value, it eliminates it. It cleans up the data basically. So get retrieves the data, strip removes leading or trailing spaces, right? Then it's converted to a float and stored in a variable. Now we're ready to do math. So now it's like a regular Python program. Here's the formula you use for conversion, right? And we drop the value captured from the user, do our math, store the output, and then we are formatting the result message. Now notice we are creating a variable that contains text. The text is in the F string format. That's why the letter F is there, right? The F string format, just as a reminder, allows you to take a variable and its formatting commands and insert it directly into a string, right? So all of this is being conglomerated into a string, fed into a variable that then we'll put up on the screen inside the label. And then they're going to add a little bit more text to it. So now they're going to say, if the temperature is over 90, that's very hot. If it's under 32, that's freezing. And otherwise, it's going to say that's a moderate temperature. Right. And I'd call that superfluous, but Fine. Now, also different than a console program, now that we have a thing to put on the screen, how are we getting it on the screen? You're not doing a print statement. Now we're directly going to inject it into the thing on the screen that we created to hold the value. And so we are going to configure the text first. So first we're making it editable, right? We're going to clear the previous content, if any. We are going to insert the message into the text field and then make it read only again so that people can't change it, right? And all of that happens inside this function. Now, mind you, you have to look back at where the function was called from to understand where the data is going back to. This is where it's way different than GUI or console programming, right? So it was originally called from the button, right? And this lambda function. So where is this going to display then? Well, the answer is it's going to display here in this label and this frame. Right? So this series of code here will handle the display of it. And then all you really have to do is set this variable to feed the thing on the screen that's already there. We're not printing to the screen. We're changing the text of the object on the screen is what we're doing. So this is where the GUI programming is different in that regard. All right, a couple more commands to add, and then we're all done. We already have the main loop, but now we have to do, arguably maybe the most critical step, which is we have to do this thing called binding the event to the convert function. So this is pretty weird. So once again, we're using this lambda keyword. So I'm highlighting it so you can see it. But in other words, we're taking the action, and notice, of pressing the return key or pressing enter on the keyboard. So think about this. Sometimes when you use an application, you take your mouse and you click the button. But like from experience, right, that some of those programs you just press enter and it does the same thing, right? That's the other piece of this. So if the person is choosing to press enter inside the screen, it'll be the same as running or clicking the button up here. So this is for the button click. This is just in case they want to press enter. We do have all the pieces of the program done now. So I'm going to do Control S to save. And I'm going to get brave here and launch the program. So here it comes. There it is on the screen. Very exciting. Very exciting indeed. All that work, and that's all we got? Right. Yeah. Welcome to GUI programming. But we do have complete control over it. So we're going to enter temperature in Celsius. And so like I always hear, like, my relatives are in Greece and they're like, oh my God, it was a 40-degree day. And it's like, oh, that sounds cold. And it's like, no, my God, we couldn't even handle being outside. So what is 40 in Fahrenheit? So there's the temperature conversion. 40 degrees Celsius is equal to 104 Fahrenheit. Yeah, that's hot. That's like Las Vegas hot, right? But it's a dry heat. And notice the extra message there. That is very hot, right? So all of that text was generated inside the function. Try some different values. So if it's 0 degrees, let's do like -2 Celsius, right, is equal to 28 degrees. That sounds about right. And how about, like, I don't know, 30 degrees Celsius is equal to 86. And that sounds like a nice summer day to me. Okay. Unless it's humid, then get me out of the sun. Right. So that's our first exercise, folks. I did not enter, I think, the bind command to the code share. I'm going to put it there now. So if you haven't had it run yet, and I know some of you don't wait and just type it in yourself, but there it is. At this point, you can copy the whole thing. Just in case you type something wrong, you can copy the whole page, drop it into your IDE, and it should work. Now, the interesting part about this is now that you have a program that's built, if you wanted to change it so it converted from Fahrenheit to Celsius, you would just change the labels and the formulas and it would do the same work, right? It wouldn't take much. All right, folks, I'm going to pause the recording here and then we're going to take a break and we'll come back. I'll answer questions after the break, but I am going to step away for 5 minutes. So, all right, for the second exercise, we are going to need a data file and that is attached here. What I've done preemptively is I went into the starter file for this for the student, the MD file, and I created this starter code here to get us going, and then we have a list of to-do objects. And then I saved it as a starter version and as a complete version in the same folder as the other program. I do need to have my my data file in the same folder with the program file. And so I've gone ahead and I've downloaded it from here. So it's in my download folder here. And I'm just going to do a very simple copy on it. And then I'm going to go to the spot where I'm storing my stuff, which is here. And I'm just going to paste that file into this folder. Now, you guys know that here in my system, the CSV files are attributed to Excel. This is a text file, but I want to look at the data really quickly. I want to know what's in it before I deal with it. And I would call this a good standard step whenever you're working with any data files is look at your data. What's in there? How's it structured? You can do this two different ways. You can look at it in the text editor, or I can let the default program, in my case, Excel, open it up. It is a CSV file, meaning if I looked at it as text, it would indicate all of these pieces of information on individual lines of text, all separated by commas, right? And so basically the data that we do have a header row, right? Country, population, growth rate, and continent, right? And then a list of all the countries or some countries. It's not all the countries on the planet, but some countries. And their population, their growth rates, and what continent they're in. So this is our data file that we're working with. Okay. We're going to feed this into our application and get results from it in the application. All right. So the next step then is to go back to our starter code. And I'm going to just pull that up on screen here. And then I'm also looking at finding my instructions here on the other screen so I can paste in the correct code for you guys. All right, so task number one is they have given us kind of like the root window structure. This is the same approach we used last time. We have a main method running everything. We're importing tkinter, and we're also going to be using the CSV tool that's working for external data files, and we also are importing the operating system tools so that we can read and write to our operating system, right? So we can interface with the files and other features of whatever OS that we're using. There's a couple of weird little quirks here. So the one that I'll throw in here first is they're also throwing in the message box like we did in the first application, right? And I will put that in the code share in just a moment here. In fact, maybe I should just do it right away. So just drop that in. But one thing that you notice is different is they have tkinter as tk, and then from tkinter, they're importing this thing called ttk, which is a very specific tool that we're going to use from that library. The other thing that I noticed that they did is, as with the other application, they're adding a little bit of visual control. They're padding out the interface so the window's got a little space around the edges and the content's not touching the edges. I will also add that into Spider here. So we have a slightly larger window this time at 500 by 400 because we're going to be putting more stuff on the screen, basically. From here, we're going to work with the CSV file. So before we can process a data file, we got to read it into our application. So I'm going to give you the code for dealing with the CSV file. I'm going to paste it here first, then I'll go to the code share. And this is the first part of it, mind you. And I can look at it here. No, actually, I'm going to look at it from Spider because you guys won't be highlighting it there. And as we're kind of reading through the file, notice that we are using the operating system importer, so that when we say OS here, that's what we're referring to. The path is the file location in your operating system. And then what we're doing is we're taking this file and we're basically looking for it in the same folder, but we're looking for that particular file. It's hard coded. It is possible, by the way, to write applications where it opens up a file window and you can look for your file. That's doable. That we're not doing it here, but that's totally a doable thing, right? And you do use the same library, by the way, to do that. We're creating a couple of data structures here to store information, right? So the one data structure is indicated with curly brackets. What kind of data structure is that? Square brackets is a list. Parentheses is a tuple. What is curly brackets?
Dictionary.
Yeah, I think Martin, you said dictionary, right?
Yes.
That's correct. And dictionaries are key value pairs, right? So you have a key and you have a value. There's also here a command to create a set for the continents. And you guys remember that's another data structure in Python also. A set is kind of a data structure where we can't have any repeat values. So in other words, continents, there's only going to be one of each continent. I can't have like two North Americas, for example. So, and this is creating an empty set. Okay, so that's the first part. Next part is we need the code that is going to try to open up the file. So here's, once again, we're dealing with users and we're dealing with files in our operating system, which may or may not be there. So I'm putting it in the code share here first, back over to Spider, and then I'm pasting it in here also. So the try part of this statement is going to try to open up that file, and it's going to open it in read-only mode. So that's what the R is for. So we're not going to be changing the contents. We just want to open it. And then when we open it, we'll refer to it as file from here on forward. So this is kind of, once again, an alias for what we're opening. So we're not going to use this name, right? We're just going to say file. When we're using the CSV library, that's got tools built into it that are built for reading these types of files that usually come from like databases or whatever. And it's going to read the CSV file into, notice what it's called, dictionary reader. And we're going to store the results of that here. So it's going to break down the file and store it into a data structure for us that would be helpful for processing. So now we're going to, for every row in our data file, we're going to go through that file and we're going to find the name, the country. And then we're also going to go and look for the data for each of the countries. And I want you to notice like the syntax on this. And first of all, don't freak out to it, right? Because the dictionary is using a multiple key value pairs, right? So we have the population, it will be set up as a key with an integer reading in the population. So it's reading each individual row's population for a particular country. It's going to read in the growth rate. Notice that one's coming in as a floating point. And then it's also going to read the continent as well. And those are the key value pairs. So this is a key, right? This is the value. Then once we've read in each individual row, we'll then add that row to our continents set. So that's how we're feeding it in here. This data structure, the key value pairs, and I want you to think about this, we're creating a dictionary that each dictionary entry is going to have another dictionary inside of it. So it's a dictionary inside of a dictionary. It's a multi-layered dictionary, not uncommon for dictionary data, by the way. If for any reason it can't open the file, then we have a message that will pop up on the screen, and then it'll pop us out of the try loop, but the program won't crash if the file's there. Our next task, and I'm looking at my directions here, which are different than the output that I see here, different order, but I have a couple pieces of information that we're going to add in before we create the filter dropdown. So I'm going to copy this and put it in the code share. So this will go right below the try except. There it is. And then I'll put this in Spider also and talk about what it does. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to take all the continents that are in the set, and it's going to sort the continents after it converts it to a list. So it's going to take the continents, convert it to a list, sort them, and then store it here. So it'll be in alphabetical order. Then we're creating the main window, and notice we're using the TTK tool here. And it's just giving us a spot to put stuff. And that's probably the best way to think about it. It's creating the main frame for all the content. Now we're going to move on to this task, and this is the one that's on the next to-do item here. And I'll give you all the code for this one at once. This is 6 lines separated with a little space here. So here comes the code. And back over in Spider, we'll do the same thing. I am getting a little red highlight here, so I'm a little concerned about that. And I think it's just because I have a long line, but we'll see if we can fix that. So this next part is creating a different kind of user interface control. And this one is actually creating the container for the drop-down control, not the drop-down control itself. So the drop-down control is when you have a little box and you click the arrow and stuff, the box pops down and you have like a list of stuff that you can scroll through and select from. This is creating the framework for that drop-down. Right? And notice it's going to have a little descriptor here so we can filter by continent. So that'll be kind of cool. Right? A little layout control, make it look nice. And there's also going to be one item in there called all. But otherwise, what it's going to do is it's going to populate the list of the dropdown. And this is where it's interesting, from the continent list, because this is filtered by continent. So it's going to populate the list from the data structure up here. It's going to be read-only. It's got a size set to it. Once again, we have a little bit of layout control with the pad X, pad Y. And then it calls a lambda function once again, which is like a on-the-fly function call for a function that we haven't created yet, thus the red underline. So we haven't created it, but we're going to. So we have to live with the error for the moment. All right. Next thing that we have to do is we have to create a frame for the country drop down. So I'm going to create a little space here. Once again, I'm going to give you a bunch of code all at once, just in the interest of time, because we are rapidly running out of it. So this is another 6 lines here, kind of in the same format of what we just did. And I'll paste that in here and start talking about it. So once again, we're creating another label frame. And so we're going to have a different drop down to select a country. We can select continent and we can select country. A little formatting, right? They have a string variable here that is, unlike this one, I don't have an option for all. But this one will basically hold the names of all the country items, and that will be selected here, and then we will trigger another lambda function for another function we haven't created yet, but we're going to. So now, to give you an idea of how the drop downs will work, You click the drop down arrow, the list will pop down, and the moment you select an item, it triggers the code. That's the default for a drop down list. So I don't have to code a button or bind it to the enter key or anything like that. The act of selecting it with your mouse will trigger the action. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a spot or a frame here to display the country's information. So I'll put that in my code first, and here it comes in the code share. Back over to Spider. And this is just basically a spot to put the information when we're all done. And it's a frame that will hold a label. Yeah, think of it like that. So it'll say country information to label it. And then we have a spot to put the output. Right. Next thing that we have to do is also create some labels for displaying the country information. So I'm just going to paste that in here. So it's going above the next to do. And you notice that's throwing a bunch of errors too. Here it comes in the code share. And notice we'll have places for the country name, the population, the growth rate, and the continent with this. And this is all labels, by the way, right? And I want you to notice what's interesting about this is where's it generating it from? It's generating it from the information that's in the dictionary is where it's grabbing it from. Right. The next part is a whole bunch of code that repeats, by the way, and that's to apply formatting to the 4 lines of code we just added. So I'll put it in my Spider first, and here it comes in the code share. And I don't know if you guys are noticing this, but when you're doing GUI coding, it's a lot more meticulous about your output, right? And we're not even learning the nuances of what all this code is doing. Some of it's fairly intuitive, but now we're taking the information and we're putting it into a grid layout. And the advantage of that is it'll look very orderly as we're working with it. So I'm just zooming out so you can see it in its entirety, right? So we'll have labels for country, right? Positions for where we're going to put it, layout control, and then we're also going to control the content inside the frame too as we're feeding it in. And we're going to do that for each thing: country, population, growth rate, and continent. So this is just taking the data we're feeding in, and making it look nice. And this is really a whole lot of repeat. We are putting it into a grid. So probably the most challenging part about this is which row and column you're putting it into. So 0, 0 would be the top left most spot. Row 1, 0 means left, but in the second row, etc. And these are all the positioning things. So the label country goes in the first box. The actual variable that's being fed in goes into the box to its right, right? So row 0, column 1, and then that process continues. So we're basically building a grid on the screen so the information that ends up on the screen is orderly. That's what we're doing. Okay. Now we're going to get to the function. So here, the function, I am going to paste in all at once, and we'll do one function at a time. So we'll start with the update country dropdown. I'll paste it into Spider first. And once again, I had that indent problem here. And here it comes in the code share. Right, and I'm going to pull this out one indent before you get to copy happy there. And I might have to go up further, you guys. So there we go. I think that's correct. All right. Back over in Spider to just talk about it real quickly. So whenever we call this function, and this is going to be it whenever they select the country from the drop down, keep that in mind. It'll figure out which one we grab. So it's going to look at the information. It's going to get it from the physical action, and then it's going to store it here, right? If we select all, then we're going to take one action. If we selected particular ones, we're going to take a different action, which is to basically look for that country and pull back its data. We just continue here, and we're looking at whatever values that we pulled in. So like whatever countries we filtered for, we clear the display, and then we update the messages. So these are basically formatting the status messages to put on the screen. And if we're selecting a country that doesn't have data, it'll give us an error message. I am seeing some red underlines here. Oh, that's because we haven't created, once again, we haven't created the functions that are being called. So, all right. So the next one is to display the country info. So I'm going to select this from my other screen here. So just bear with me. Paste it here first, and then I'll put it in the code share. So there's the next function. Indenting is good on that one. All right. So every time the country dropdown is selected, it's going to go ahead here, right? And we're going to take the selected country, and we're going to see if it is in the files or the data that we have conglomerated. And then if it is there, we grab the population data, we format it as text, and then we look at the growth rates. And this one's got a little logic here, a selection statement. So if the growth rate is greater than 0, it's going to show that it's growing. If it's less than 0, it's going to show the population is declining. Otherwise, if it's not changing, it's going to call it stable. And then we're going to update the information on the screen. Otherwise, we're just going to clear the country info. Now, this is a function we do not have yet. So let's go ahead and define that one. So this one, I'm just going to add here. And I want you to be careful about where you add it. It's got to be at the same level as the root here. So it's got to, you don't want it indented basically, because otherwise it won't work, right? So it's got to be on that same one indent from the margin, basically. And all this one does is it takes the stuff on the screen and clears the entries. That's all that does. I'm still seeing a couple of red underlines here, and I'm gonna. Okay, so we'll address these. It says undefined name, so we're gonna have to check those to see what the issue is with that. I think it's probably because we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, fair enough. We haven't gotten there yet. All right. Last task here. Well, last 2 tasks. And I'm going to paste both of these in at once. Just a heads up. And there'll be little descriptors here that go with, so you'll know what they're for. So we're going to add a status bar at the bottom of the page. So these are the 2 missing pieces here. So that we can see what we're looking at. So it's going to provide information at the very bottom of the window. And then we also have the string variable thing that we were working with, and that one's also being declared here. So now you notice all the red underlines are gone. I will paste this in the code share here in just a moment. Right. So those will be added. Okay, I need to grab a few things to add here. So let me just reselect. So I'm going to add all of that to the code share. That's going to be out here. Paste it there. All right, so we have the clear country info. We have the variables that we were missing, and then we'll have the update country dropdown, which we'll call, and this will actually run that function for us. Okay, so now that we have it all built, and remember, this is really critical, that data file needs to be in your folder. I'm doing a Control S to save, and we're doing this just as class is ending here. I'm going to hit the run button and I'll show you what we've created. And this one's a little bit more powerful than the last one. It is already up on screen, I think. I am recording. I see somebody has asked that question. Let me try running that again. Oh, there it is. Okay. So we know that it's finding the data file, right? Because it's loading stuff up. So I want you to notice what's going to happen here. Filter by continent. So I'm going to choose, let's say, Europe. Right. So now this list here is only going to show European countries that are part of that list. This is not all the countries on the planet, right? This is a truncated list. So if I want to look at the population of Spain, it pulls it up on the list. So this is Spain, the population, the growth rate is stable, and it shows you the continent. If I want to change continents and go to South America, then I can choose, well, I only have two to choose from here. So I'm going to choose Colombia. And they have a growing population rate. And if you want to have all the countries that are available on that list, I can choose any of the countries, right? So I can just kind of randomly click on one here, and then it shows its continent if I didn't filter by continent. Now, I could take that data, right? And I could, and this is like where, and I wouldn't use synthetic data for this. You could go out, you could probably use an AI engine for this and create a complete country list of population data in the same format and use that to drive this. And you could look up the information for every country on the planet, right? But that's a much larger data file because it's like 178 countries or 174, I forget, something in that range. But folks, this is the completed application. So here it is running on the screen. Here's the code, and I'm going to kind of just very slowly show this code. I'm going to scroll. And this is for all the people screenshotting. That's why I'm doing it in the video. I'm going to scroll again. And I'm scrolling again. Moving the box. Scrolling one more time. Two more times. And the last couple of scrolls. And one more. And that's the whole application. All right. All right, folks, this video will end here.